Hey everyone, Pastor Tim here. It is Wednesday night, Thinking Person's Guide to Faith, and looking forward to spending a few minutes with you as we dive into Luke chapter 2 for the third time in our Thinking Person's Guide to Faith. Actually, about the fifth time when you consider the series that we've been doing in worship and, of course, our Bible study. So there's a lot in Luke chapter 2, and we're going to wrap it up today. While people are joining us, I want to remind you that worship this weekend, we will continue our series in Luke. We're following Jesus through the Gospel of Luke, Get Used to Different. And last weekend, we started looking at the sermon that Jesus preached in his hometown. It was the first time he had preached there. And powerful message that Jesus shared didn't go well. And we're going to talk about why that is this weekend. Pastor Jose is going to be preaching this weekend, and he's going to look at rejection, why it is that Jesus was rejected, and why that might be good news for you. What it is that Jesus said that can sometimes challenge us, but ultimately transform our lives. So that'll be this weekend. Excuse me. We come to you every weekend, Saturday at 5 o'clock. Facebook and YouTube, and that's available for you on demand. And then, of course, Sunday morning, 9 and 10:30 worship services. And in between those two services is Sunday school, 9:50 to 10:20 for kindergarten through fifth grade. And after the second service, our youth meet, middle school and high school meet, and that's at 11:45. If you've got comments, if you want to check in today, you can do that. I can see them on my screen if you want to say hi or where you're from, or if you have questions. I want to start tonight, though, and just talk a little bit about some things that bring sadness. Tomorrow, I will be at the funeral, as will many, for a good friend of mine, Mary Callistad. Her husband, Walt, was the senior pastor where I was the associate pastor for 22 years. And Walt and Mary, Jan and I did ministry for 22 years together. We were very, very good friends, still are, traveled the world together. And tomorrow we will be attending Mary's funeral. And so I want to pray, invite you to pray for Walt and for his family, the kids, the grandkids. And then I just heard about 2 minutes before we went on air here that another good friend of mine, Greg Olson, passed away today. Greg was also a partner with me at Community Church of Joy. And he's a man who has battled cancer for a long, long time. And today he went home. And so we want to pray for Gene and for his family as they mourn his passing. And I want to thank you, those of you who sent in some kind remarks and your prayers for the issue that Jan and I are going through. Jan they've discovered cancer in a couple different spots. They don't think they're related. Looks like something in the thyroid, something in her lower back. The news is hopeful, but they've seen a couple things where they're just not quite sure. And so the biopsy for the thyroid, the biopsy for the lower back has been sent on to another lab to go a bit deeper and find out what they're really working with. And we won't hear what the actual diagnosis is for probably 3 or 4 more days, maybe more than that. And then we'll have a better understanding of what we need to do next. So she and I are headed out on vacation. We've been cleared to go on vacation. We're going to leave on Friday, and we'll just spend some time together and heal up a little bit and rest up and get ready to come back to mission and ministry and whatever it is that is going to need to happen to get Jan well again. So appreciate your prayers. I know she appreciates all the prayers as well. And this is why we're part of a community of faith, because we need each other in these days. So just some things to be praying about for Walt Callistad and his family, for Greg Olson's family. And then Jan and I surely appreciate your prayers. And I'll be praying for you on Friday as we're flying on our vacation. So we are in Luke chapter 2. We're wrapping up Luke chapter 2. Diana, thank you very much. And want to remind you, just for a little bit of context, every gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, for every gospel, the starting point for the story of Jesus is the beginning of his ministry, essentially beginning with his baptism. That's true for Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But they all start their gospels a bit differently. Matthew has a birth story that includes the visit of the Magi. Mark goes right into the baptism. Luke, as we've seen, starts with Zechariah and Elizabeth finding out they're going to be pregnant with John the Baptist, and then Mary finds out she's going to be pregnant with Jesus. We have the birth story that we've been looking at, and then we have the story we're going to end with today with Jesus at the age of 12 in the temple. Matthew, Mark, I said that already, Luke, and then John begins with Jesus basically at the beginning, referencing Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. John begins with, in the beginning was the Word, meaning Jesus, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and talks about how the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And so, again, for all four Gospels, the actual story of Jesus begins with his ministry and his baptism, but they all have preludes to set it up. And these preludes, especially in Matthew, Luke, and John, are used to set up the themes that they're going to dwell on and look at when it comes to the story of Jesus. So all that's to say, Luke uses chapters 1 and 2 of his gospel to set up the themes that he's going to touch on with the life of Jesus. And we've looked at some of those themes. We've seen how he has basically embedded the story of Jesus into the story of Rome, that this story takes place under Roman occupation. This story takes place with a Roman Caesar who brings a peace that's filled with violence and oppression and taxation and death. It's a Caesar who claims to be the Son of God, who claims to be the Lord of all. And yet, in Luke's gospel, Jesus is the new Caesar, bringing a very different kind of peace, not one not based on power, but based on the death and resurrection of Jesus. So we're going to see the themes of Jesus as Lord. We're going to see the themes of Jesus as Savior. We're going to see themes of Jesus caring for the poor and for the outcast and the oppressed. He's setting all of that up in his first two chapters, what we call an overture. He's also rooting the story of Jesus in the story of Israel. And so there are many references to the Israel story as well, especially in chapter 1, which we didn't really spend time looking at. And as we're going to see now at the end of chapter 2, where Jesus is placed in the temple and he begins to once again tease out his identity as the Son of God. So Luke chapter 1 and chapter 2 serve as a way to introduce the story of Jesus that begins officially with chapter 3, with Jesus being baptized and then going out and healing the sick, feeding the hungry, telling stories, ultimately dying and rising again for us. So what we have in Luke chapter 2 near the end now is the only story that we have about Jesus as a child. And we've got a couple birth stories, but nothing to tell us what Jesus was like as a toddler, as a grade schooler. All we have is the story of Jesus at 12 years old, which significantly is the year when Jewish boys at that time, and now Jewish girls, enter into adulthood. And so it's at the age of 12, which is still true today for Jewish boys. They go through a bar mitzvah and they become Jewish men. Girls go through the bat mitzvah, they become Jewish women. And so Jesus here is in the temple at the age of 12, that time when he is going to begin to move into manhood as a Jewish man. And so I want to pick up the story a little bit because there are some important themes that Luke is going to tease out for us in this story, again, about Jesus. Remember, it's an overture. He's playing little snippets of songs that we're going to hear again and again, starting in chapter 3. And he's bringing them all together in this last story about Jesus in the temple. So let's see here. Let me just again say what he's going to do is he's going to set up the two important themes: Jesus' unique relationship to the Father, and then the unique relationship that Jesus has to the temple. The temple is essentially where the presence of God is experienced. And Jesus ultimately, and John says it this way, Jesus ultimately is the presence of God, the temple. So Luke is going to tease out, again, Jesus as Son of God, and then Jesus in relationship to the temple. So we start at verse 41. Now, every year, his parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. Now, This is a yearly event that Jewish people to this day still celebrate. The Passover is the commemoration of the story of the Exodus that takes place in the book of Exodus. And it's the story of God liberating the people of Israel from slavery in Egypt under the leadership of Moses. And the Passover specifically was the final sign that God used to convince the Egyptians to let the people of Israel go. And this is the Passover, when the angel of death in the story passes over Egypt, and all the firstborns lose their lives, except for those who have put the blood of the lamb on the doorposts of their house. All right, the top and the two sides. And when the angel of the Lord sees that blood of the lambs, it passes over. And that's what ends up becoming the moment when Pharaoh finally says, I'm going to let the people go. So they celebrate that every year, and they have a Passover meal and they have a celebration. And so every year they would go, Jesus' family would go to Jerusalem to celebrate that meal. Now, it's one of 3 annual pilgrimages that Jewish people would make to Jerusalem, especially if they could. This is one of the first. So all of the Jewish males are required to go to Jerusalem if they live within a 20-mile radius of Jerusalem. The females aren't required, but the males are. And we have a story here of Mary joining with Joseph to go to this annual feast. By the way, this has some echoes to the story of Samuel. Samuel in the Old Testament is the first prophet. His mother and father made an annual pilgrimage every year to the temple. Hannah is not able to have kids. God promises her a child, and she promises that that child will be committed to the temple where Samuel grows up. He becomes a prophet. And so in this part, I mentioned earlier in chapter 2, Luke is embedding the story in the Roman story. Now he's embedding the story of Jesus in the Jewish story, particularly making ties to the prophet Samuel. So when he was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. So this is the year before his actual bar mitzvah, which takes place at year 13, but he begins the training in year 12. He's going to become an adult. And so this is a transition now beginning. When the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming that he was in a group of travelers, they went a day's journey. Then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. All right, so they would travel in groups, large groups, and they would do this in part for safety's sake. And they would do it because they were a community-based people. They did things as community together. And the way that it would often work is the women would leave first, because they would tend to travel more slowly. They're the ones who would be watching after the kids. So they would head out first as a group, and then the men would catch up later, usually in the evening. And so it could very well be that Joseph is assuming that Jesus is with Mary and the women gone up ahead. And Mary is thinking, well, Jesus must be staying behind with Joseph and we'll see him tonight. Surprise, surprise. No Jesus. Years ago, when I was working at Community Church of Joy and we had a Wednesday night program, my kids were little, and I was teaching, and Jan brought the kids over for all the different kids' activities, and she was taking one of the Bible studies. And so I went home, and Jan came home, and neither one of us had the kids. Oh, she assumed I had them. I assumed she had them. Thankfully, we only lived a mile from the church. Kids had no idea we'd forgotten them. So I could understand how Mary and Joseph might have missed Jesus, assuming that one or the other had Jesus with them. And to come to find out, he's not here. The challenge for Mary and Joseph, they had already traveled for a day, and it was evening time, and they couldn't go back until the next morning. So you can imagine how panicked they must have been, knowing that their son Jesus was going to be in Jerusalem by himself for a minimum of 2 days. The day they traveled, of course, overnight, and then they got to travel back a day's journey. So after 3 days, they found him sitting in the temple among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. Now, this gives us a sort of a picture of how rabbinical teaching took place back then, because rabbinical teaching wasn't just sermonizing. There was a lot of Q&A. And sometimes it would be the rabbis who would question. For example, we have an example of that in Jesus. He takes his disciples away to Caesarea Philippi for what theologians call the midterm exam. And he asks them, "Who do you say that I am?" And so they reply, or "Who do people say that I am?" And they give their answers. And then Jesus say, "Who do you say that I am?" And they have this back and forth. The rabbi asks questions, the students respond, the rabbis respond to their answers, and that's how they did their education in many ways. So you kind of get a sense that that's what's happening here, that the rabbis are asking some questions, and 12-year-old Jesus is amazing them with his insights into their questions. So Jesus is in this environment, and he's there listening and taking it all in, drinking it all in. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." Now, this is sort of an interesting phrase. I'm going to go in the weeds here a little bit, but not too much. Why have you treated us like this? Scholars think that this isn't just a spur-of-the-moment question. Jesus, why did you do this? It has the form of a formula, meaning it may have been the phrasing of it is the kind of question that might be asked on different occasions. And it's not so much, this question of why did you do this to us, but more it's an accusation. Look what you did to us. You have betrayed us. You have hurt us. You have deeply frightened us. So it's more than just the question, why did you do that? There's an accusation behind it. Jesus, you knew better. You knew the panic that you would put us in. You knew that we would be worried. Why would you do that to us? So there's some real energy behind this statement. And they feel like they've been betrayed by Jesus, that he has somehow let them down or hurt them. And could it be that maybe they see it a bit as a betrayal that to Joseph being his dad? Jesus, you wouldn't have done this if Joseph was your real father. So they're feeling dissed. Jesus said to them, "Why are you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" All right, so think back to the question they've just asked him, and maybe some of the tension that Joseph might feel because he's not Jesus' paternal father in that sense. And then Jesus says, "You knew I'd be in my Father's house." So you get the sense here that, first of all, Jesus is a little surprised. Why? Almost, really? Why were you panicked? I thought you knew this is where I would be. He had no idea that they were looking for him. He assumed that the first place they would have looked was the temple, his Father's house. So what's happening here, and Luke is doing some things with this storytelling. Jesus is revealing here in this phrase, "Did you not know I'd be at my Father's house?" He is saying that he understands he has a unique relationship to God. And again, what Luke is doing here is he's setting up this unique relationship Jesus has with God. It's going to pick up again in the next chapter when God speaks to Jesus and said, "You are my beloved son. I'm fully pleased with you." It's going to come up again when Jesus heads out into the wilderness and he's tested. Are you really God's son? And he knows in the midst of that testing that he does have a special relationship with God. So this is a theme that Luke is setting up, and we're going to see it all the way to the cross. Father, why have you abandoned me? Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. So he's revealing here that he has a unique relationship with God. He uses the intimate term father to describe that relationship. So there's a sense of informality when Jesus uses that word. Didn't you know that I would be in my daddy's house? And he also said in that phrase, didn't you realize that I was going to be about my dad's business? It was necessary for these things to happen. There was sorry, I got a little lost here. I was just looking at my notes. Did you not know that I'd be in my father's house? So it gives you this sense that this is the way things are supposed to be. And this is what I'm called to do. This is what I've been born to do. This is the relationship I'm in. They did not understand what he said to them. So we have this ongoing struggle with Mary and Joseph trying to come to terms with who Jesus is. Now we know in chapter 1 that Mary is told by the angel, "You're going to bear a son, Jesus." We know in chapter 2, the shepherds come and they say what the angels have said about Jesus. But you can imagine still, this is their son. They're watching him grow up. And now they get to age 12. And it's almost at that age he starts to pull away a little bit to suggest that he's not just for Mary and Joseph, but he's for the whole world. And so Mary and Joseph struggle, and we're going to see that Mary struggles again later on in the gospel, where she and her kids, Jesus' brothers and sisters, want to take him away because they think that maybe he's a little nuts. So Mary and Joseph, and then later Mary, really struggle with who Jesus is. And if they struggle, then it's okay if we struggle. If Mary could struggle being right there in the midst of it, then we can struggle as well. And that's pretty normal. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart. So Jesus goes home, and as far as we know, again, we have no other stories. As far as we know, he lives his life from the age of 12 to about 30, doing what every normal firstborn son would do. So we assume that he helped care for the family. We assume that he probably apprenticed under his father for a while, maybe took over the family business for a while. Again, not carpentry, but probably stone masonry work. When Joseph died, which we assume happened because we never hear from him again, he probably became the main provider for the family, the main protector for the family. We assume all of these things happen. And then at the age of 30, his father calls to him, and he begins his father's business of telling the world that the kingdom of God has come. And Luke says, Mary treasured all these things in her heart, which is the exact same wording when the shepherds came to see the birth of Jesus, and Mary treasured all those things in her heart. So you get this sense that Mary is just building up this treasure chest of who Jesus is, his identity. He's her son, obviously, but she's building up this treasure chest of who her son is. And she's going to be with him at the foot of the cross. And then finally, in verse 52, we get this phrase, and Jesus increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor. I memorized that Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and humans. Interestingly, here's what 1 Samuel says about the boy Samuel. Now, the boy Samuel continued to grow in stature and in favor with the Lord and with the people. Almost the same. And so, again, what Luke is doing here is he is rooting Jesus in the Jewish story. He's rooting Jesus in this very special prophet by the name of Samuel, whose birth was also divine, like Jesus, though not quite the same. And so we've got in chapter 2 now all of the themes that Luke is going to be looking at, starting with chapter 3. We've got Jesus rooted in the Roman story. He is the new Caesar. And Jesus rooted in the Jewish story. He is the new Samuel, come to proclaim the coming of the kingdom of God. And so all of these themes will now start with Luke chapter 3 as we get into the beginning of his mission and ministry. So that's a little bit of Luke chapter 2. Luke chapter 2 with the Christmas story, and then, of course, this story of Jesus at the age of 12. And so, again, what Luke is doing there with that story is he is rooting Jesus in the storyline of the God being his father, and, of course, being about his business was being about the temple business, which is about being God's presence in the world. And so that's a little bit of what we've been uncovering there in Luke. So we're going to take a break now for the next few weeks. I'm going to be out of town, and in 2 or 3 weeks we'll pick it up again. We'll maybe dive into chapter 3 a little bit, pick up the story, and see how the story of chapter 3 has a little different vibe to it than chapters 1 and 2, which again serve more as overture. I hope that's helpful for you. I was a little discombobulated with my notes there tonight. Sorry about that. It happens. And want to remind you again that Chaplain Jose's got a great message coming up this weekend. And we're going to look at the part 2 of the sermon we started last week, where Jesus preaches in his hometown. They're all really excited to have the hometown boy come home until he preaches. And then they want to throw him off a cliff. There's a reason for that. There's some things that Jesus says that are pretty radical. And basically, he's saying through that, get used to different. I'm up to something new, and that something new is good news for you. We'll come to you online 5 o'clock Saturday, YouTube and Facebook. That'll be available on demand Sunday, 9 and 10:30. All right, that's it for me. I'm out for a while. Have a good week, and may the Lord bless you and keep you all.